All right, get out. Say get out. So we're going to now do PAIVM with overpressure into PAIVMs. Okay, we're going to do the flexion bias, so that here's the review, and then we're going to look at what the difference is between a PAIVM and a PAIVM. Okay, so same as last time, we palpating sacrum, L1 to 5, feeling the TL junction, getting a general sense of all of the segments. In standing, the way I have Sam positioned right now, flexion left quadrant was the limitation, so my structural barrier differential is it articular, muscle myofascial, or dural? I did overpressure in standing, so I have an inkling of what's going on. I also did a little bit of that trick where I poked on every segment, so I kind of did that standing PAIVM. So I already have a sense that, yeah, I have a suspicion that L4-5 is not upsliding on the right side. Okay, so there's my suspicion, and now I'm going into my PAIVM to try and see if that confirms that. So I grab the legs. So especially with bigger legs, I don't want to work too hard or else I get tired by the end of the day. So I put the knee into my hip crease. So now I have my hand on the lower leg supporting it. The thigh is in my hip crease. Get all the friction out of the place. So now what I can do is I can weight shift. And as I weight shift, I'm doing everything right now with my weight shift. My left arm is isometric, just holding there. And
Yeah, please, Sam.
sorry. I forgot there was an audience, you know. So now as I do this, I can feel where I'm getting into flexion. So for the PAIVM, right now I'm just biasing into general flexion of the lumbar spine. For the PAIVM, I will go specifically to the segment, because in a PAIVM, you know what segment you're going after. A PAIVM, I'm like, I wonder which segment I'm going after. Got that? So here, general flexion, hand on the sacrum so that when I extend the hip, I don't lose my general flexion bias. Straighten the bottom leg for me. I let him straighten the bottom leg, but not so much that we induce a side bend. I'm aiming the foot towards the front corner of the bed, so again, biased into flexion. I let the leg rest there so that as I do the arms, he doesn't roll off the bed, and then I'll offset the leg. Okay? I come here. I'm going to rest the arm here. Take this arm, 60 degrees of flexion, which is what you guys did. So pulling here, going down until I start to wind up the low back into flexion. I'm not at full end range in any particular segment. I'm not at end range at any particular segment. That's a significant difference between the PAIVM and the PAIVM. With the PAIVM, you're taking up all the slack to lock out segments. With your PAIVM, you're biasing into winding into flexion. Offset the leg. So now I have a moving pelvis. I reach in. I say, I'm just going to roll you towards me a little bit. My thighs are against the bed so the patient feels comfortable. You can hug up a little bit so that they know that you're there for them. But as we saw in the checkouts, make sure that when you do your techniques, you're not hugging so tight that you're blocking their motion. Okay? I've now biased into flexion. The whole spine is wound into that flexion left quadrant. In other words, all of the right segments are attempting to upslide. I take a look. I say, okay, that spiral looks pretty good. I swoop my hand. Here's the step test. Does any one segment pop out more than the other, or is any one segment drop down like a collapsed step from any of the others? A fixed segment might be raised. A hypermobile segment, instability segment might be dropped. It's not a hard and fast rule, but if there's a malposition, you're thinking, gee, I wonder if that's a fixation or if that's an instability. That make sense? Okay, so there's your general step test. Spinous processes are the most anomalous structure in our body, so the step test is not super reliable, but when you get one that's really sticking out, you have to say, I wonder if that's a really anomalous spinous process or if there's a segmental dysfunction. Okay, it's your first line of inquiry here. So now we move on. Your PAIVM is all of the segments. So we start here, we place our hands. You can go spinous process. Since it's a combined movement, what your best bet is, these are your spinous processes, right? Side lying, they're poked out like that. Stick your thumb right in between the two spinous processes so that when you move, you can feel this. Remember, in flexion extension, you felt this. In flexion, do the spinous processes move away? In extension, do the spinous processes come together? So now we're going into combined flexion. So do they move apart and do they twist? Am I able to move that spinous process away from the other spinous process? I come in here, I watch my angle, I'm side bending away and pulling into flexion. I can palpate. Now, depending on the size of the body, here you can go just between spinous processes and just on the pelvis and say, how's that one? How's that one? How's that one? How's that one? For your PAIVM, you're right in there. Got it? PAIVM, you can still be in there. I can feel it too. Okay? Especially if there's a lot of muscle mass to get through. I want a lot of input between both hands. Yep, that one's moving away, that one's moving away. Or, no, that one doesn't seem to be going. Then I come back to it. Okay? Now, to do it as a PAIVM, so this was my flexion PAIVM. I now have a segment that I'm interested in. So here would be a PAIVM with overpressure. This PAIVM is positive. L4-5 PAIVM is positive. That means the motion between L4 and L5 is limited. That's what a positive PAIVM is. L3-4 is fine, L2-3 is fine, L5-S1 is fine. But there's a positive PAIVM at L4-5 into a flexion left side bending direction. What makes a positive PAIVM? Lack of motion where? Between two segments, period. What are your options? Muscular myofascial, that's one option. Articular, that's another option. Dural, that's another option. Yep.
Is there, this is kind of for the
Just taking it out of
hypermobility,
range.
can you feel hypermobile segments also?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
so, alright.
Yeah. Okay, so, yep.
Are you naming it by just L4, or are you saying L4?
L4 is a bone, so movements always happen at joints. So that, no, because the people will do that all the time. So there's no such thing as an L4 positive PAIVM. You're like, what does that mean? It's an L4-5 positive PAIVM. Okay? That's important language. Now, it is muscular, myofascial, articular, or dural. We don't know which. So we need to perform a structural barrier differential. How do we do that? PAIVM with overpressure first. Okay? We get in there. I know it. So I'm going to hook on the spinous process of L4 because I can get to it. I can hug close to the spinous process of L5. You can't really palpate the spinous process of L5, so you get as close as you can. Maybe here you're kind of going off into the articular pillar. That's a good technique. Hug it up, stabilize, and then PAIVM with overpressure. Moving from below. I'm moving the pelvis. It is legal to stabilize L5 and try and move from above. Move that L4 up on that L5. I do the overpressure. What are my options for feeling? What's the end feel here? So first, there's the three categories. You can have an articular end feel, muscular myofascial end feel, or a dural end feel. Okay, you got to classify them. And what are the examples of an articular end feel? Firm leathery, that's one of them. What does firm leathering imply? Capsular scarring. Okay, what's the other articular end feel? Firm non-giving for articular. Firm non-giving is articular. Okay, firm and giving is muscular. So firm non-giving, or firm hard, or even just hard. Now, a hard end feel implies a bony block. Okay, so on your boards, you do something, you're moving a joint, you run into a hard end feel, it's a bony block. On your boards, you run into a springy end feel, you're thinking cartilage, torn meniscus, something like that. But there's a qualitative difference between a capsular end feel and a true fixation. A true fixation, you go to move it, you're like, doesn't go anywhere. So that's why some people will call it a firm hard end feel, because they're like, you're not running into a bony block, but that thing isn't moving. It needs a manipulation. Okay? You have firm non-yielding, that's capsular. You want to mobilize that one. All right, so you can start to do directional capsular techniques. Those are your articular end feels. There's one more articular end feel in quotes. Not empty. Boggy. What does boggy mean?
Liquid.
What's that? Not laxity. Nope, not inflammation.
Fluid
It's not the
buildup.
capsule itself, it's the articular, it's everything
It's,
around it.
yep, say it loud, say it proud.
So it's not the capsule itself, it's articular, so it's all the surrounding structures of the capsule that's creating the limitation.
It's still articular, but the glide is not smooth. As you're going along, it's like, there's all these different things that are happening. You're trying to move it through mud. So it's likely some sort of muscular compression, but that muscular compression is disrupting your slide of the joint. So we're still considering it articular because it's not a clean slide. The other reason we're considering it articular is these joints, this end field responds really well to articular techniques. So you can do joint mobs, you can do muscle energy, you can manipulate it, and it cleans up the bogginess. Okay? Stanley Paris from the University of St. Augustine came up with that term. It's a great term, and it's a good way to feel if someone's off tracking, not moving well, clean it up, and then they do better. Those are your articular end feels. What's your muscular end feel?
I'm giving.
Firm giving, firm springy. Okay? And what's your dural end feel?
You'd ask
We
them.
don't know that yet. What is it a sense like? What's that?
Or no, I was gonna say they would
Maybe like-
They might feel pulling. They very much often will feel pulling. Okay? And it doesn't feel like a stretching pull. I go like this, and they're like, oh man, I feel that stretch going all through here. And you're like, that's weird. And it's an uncomfortable feel. It's like they're wincing. What they'll say to you is, it feels like an uncomfortable stretch. It feels like a stretch you don't want to bear into. Like you feel a stretch in a muscle, you're like, oh, that feels so good, keep stretching that. You know that feeling, right? When it's dural, it's not that. Okay, so there's a big qualitative sense to it. And it's also very resistant. It's kind of like a guarding, but not exactly like a guarding, but it's like the muscles just don't want to let you go. Okay? That's your dural end feel. So we come in here, we stabilize L4, we do our PAIVM with overpressure, and we assess what category is it. Okay? Positive PAIVM, from that we categorize it, that's part of our structural barrier differential, but now we're going to take it a step further. Bend both knees for me. Now we're going to do our PAIVM. To do a proper PAIVM, we want to do a locking from above and from below. So what we want is an assessment of L4-5. So what we will do is palpate L4-5, L5-S1, and S1-S2. Yes, if they're moving through S1-S2, they either have a transitional segment or something's really wrong. So you're really palpating L5-S1 and L4-5. Okay? So you flex up, take up the slack at L5-S1. So you're going to go up to, but not into L4-5. So the next slide, the right up, the locking from below, just so you know. Flex up to, but not into L4-5, because you want to leave L4-5 alone. But I want to take up the slack of L5-S1. Straighten your bottom leg. Wait, hold on. Straighten your bottom leg. There, okay. Very similar to your PAIVM setup, but where you're ending is different. That's the big difference. Where before you were going for general flexion, right now you're taking up the slack of L5-S1, you're going up to but not into L4-5. Let me borrow this arm, untwist a little bit. This will be our starting position. Now we palpate, we have L1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5. Where am I taking up the slack?
right above it.
Down to through L3-4, but not into L4-5. Therefore, down to, but not into L4-5. Now what we've done is locked from below and from above. In other words, locking is taking up the slack of all of the segments above and below our segment of interest. Now, everything that I do with the upper body translates into L4 movement. Everything that I do with the lower body translates into L5 movement. So I come closer, I hug up, offset the leg. I come closer, I try and hug up the articular pillars. So I'm directly on L4-5 facet, well, the articular process, so I'm getting a good sense of what's going on the facet. I've locked down to but not into, so the upper body becomes one. The ribs, the upper spine, my arm, shoulder, and thumb all become L4. Below, we have pelvis, sacrum, L5, arm, hand, all becomes L5. So now whatever happens here is L4, whatever happens here is L5. I do the same kind of motion, it's the same vector direction, but now that's how much motion there is. Not much. I still have the intention of the twist in my body because that's going to give me my good pressure. I can't do this, super strong thumbs, right? I just lock it in, use the body, there's my pressure. It's exactly how you can set up for mobilization and eventually manipulation. Okay? Good. Okay, so let's set up for, just the other way.
For like 30 minutes.
Yeah.